I'm going to read out a report from the Daily Telegraph, which relates to Bloody Sunday and this the new developments around that. Um, I'll just read this out. Sergeant O criticises gutless government. A former soldier who investigated over Bloody Sunday has called the government gutless for failing to introduce a statute of limitations. The 77-year-old, known as Sergeant O, said a statute of limitations should be introduced to prevent future historical investigations from taking place. Sergeant O was one of 17 former members of the Parachute Regiment to have their actions following a civil rights march in Derry in 1972 examined. Last month, Northern Ireland's Public Prosecution Service announced it will prosecute one man, Soldier F. The decision sparked disappointment among some of the families of those killed, but also prompted anger among military veterans. 13 civil rights demonstrators were shot dead on January the 30th, 1972. Soldier F will face charges for the murders of James Ray and William McKinney and the attempted murders of Joseph Friel, Michael Quinn, Joe Mahone, and Patrick O'Donnell. Sergeant O, a grandfather, was accused by police of injuring two men who were wounded by flying debris and was interviewed under caution on April 13, 2016, at a police station close to his home in southern England. In an interview with Forces News, Sergeant O said it was a relief to be told he would not be put before a judge and that his claims he had done nothing wrong had been proved right. He described serving in Northern Ireland in the 70s as utterly hell on wheels, with riots every night, but he insisted he had no regrets. "I do it again the exact same way," at one stage. Sergeant O revealed at one stage he and his family were placed under police protection. He maintains the IRA knows where he is. He also said he backs a campaign for a statute of limitations to be introduced. "The government is entirely gutless," he said. "They should draw a line under it as they have done for the IRA terrorists, not only for Ireland but for Afghanistan and Iraq." Meanwhile, large numbers of bikers are expected to roar into London on April the 12th to protest against the prosecution of Soldier F. Harry Ragg, the Rolling Thunder Ride organizer, said, "Our argument is with the government, not with victims of Bloody Sunday." Okay, this is obviously a difficult issue, and I think there's a lot of talking points to be made around it. Firstly, for people like myself, which is the majority of the population, who have never served in the armed forces, I think as much as what we might try, as much as we might watch war films or watch news reports, I don't think anything can compare with the real world experience that soldiers face. And for young men in Northern Ireland in the early 70s, 18, 19, 20-year olds, it must have been a very daunting and stressful experience having nationalist youths throw missiles at them every single day. They would have been under enormous pressure. Um, but there is no question about it. On that day in 1972, 13 innocent civilians were killed. And that's historic fact. There were worse events in the Troubles perpetrated by the IRA, worse in terms of number of fatalities, that have been overshadowed compared to Bloody Sunday. I mean, the amount of news coverage, the amount of documentaries, films, articles that have been written about Bloody Sunday are extensive. There's no question about that. I've got kind of mixed feelings about this. On one hand, I understand Sergeant O's anger, or rather, I understand because I don't know if he's guilty or innocent. I mean, he says he's innocent. I don't know that. So I'm not going to come out and defend him. I don't know. 13 innocent people died, and there are elderly soldiers on the mainland right now who they may take it to the grave knowing what they done or didn't do. Um, but I think the issue here is double standards, namely that under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, IRA terrorists were freed. These were people that had committed heinous acts of carnage, killing and wounding thousands, literally. When you include those who are wounded, we're talking about thousands of people were the victims of the IRA and other Republican paramilitaries. And yes, loyalists were also guilty of atrocities, but not on the same scale as the Republican groups. Um, there are a lot of skeletons and ghosts from the Troubles, there's no question about that. And I understand the victims of those men who were killed feeling let down. But what about the victims of IRA atrocities? I mean, actually, concurrently, there is new inquiries now into the 1974 Birmingham pub bombings. Um, my former MP, Chris Mullen, actually worked on the case of the Birmingham Six, who were, of course, acquitted, which means the actual perpetrators have never been identified fully, as far as I know. Birmingham was, of course, the worst act on the mainland. 21 people killed and many more injured. So I mentioned that I have mixed feelings about this. I can understand the anger about perceived double standards, and it does feel like I think for elderly soldiers like a witch hunt, like it's a sort of vendetta. Um, and it would definitely be galling to prosecute old soldiers when IRA terrorists walk free after serving only a couple of years for heinous offences. So the double standards, I think, is the most controversial aspect of this. However, I will say this, and it's not an easy thing to say because when you say it, people automatically have. Britain's quite a military orientated country. So, what I mean by that is there are a lot of people, if you criticize the military, they get into this very right wing knee jerk reaction like you're anti military or you're unpatriotic. Like I say, I can't pretend to know what it's like for young soldiers, any soldiers, to be on the front line. And we must always respect the sacrifice and courage they go through. But like any group of people, there are bad apples. And I don't agree with the premise that when soldiers do cross the line, they shouldn't face consequences. And I think, for example, this biker group, um, you know, would their argument be that soldiers should never face justice if they have overstepped the line? And I don't agree with Sergeant O that there should, including Iraq and Afghanistan. He said, well, there are far more recent conflicts. And there were cases, Baha Musa, for example, the Iraqi man who was abused by British troops. Um, so I do not agree with the premise that because soldiers go through incredibly stressful experiences, that condones abusing civilians. Never. There is no excuse for abusing civilians. And if the argument is, oh, they attacked us, well, then they're not civilians, they're insurgents. But unarmed, innocent civilians, there is no excuse. And my line on this is there is a reason why the British Army is held in such high regard because of professionalism. That is what sets it apart from terrorists. Terrorists have no moral code. The British Army is expected to have that. Any professional army is expected to have that. So if we take the attitude of, well, it's our side, we're not going to do anything, I think that's wrong. I do believe that when individuals cross the line, they should face justice. But with in the case of Bloody Sunday, I think it's the context of that. Two things: the passage of time. We're talking now almost half a century, and the obvious double standards. It would be, I think, fundamentally wrong to prosecute old soldiers when former terrorists who have killed and maimed dozens of people walk free. That would be fundamentally unfair. For that reason, I don't think they should be prosecuted. If IRA terrorists were still serving prison time for the crimes they committed, then I think there might be a different angle on it, but they aren't. That's the point. But I do not agree with this nationalistic sort of knee-jerk reaction that if you criticize individual soldiers who have crossed the line, that somehow makes you anti-military or some sort of left-wing radical or something. Not at all. I would argue, in fact, that when individuals do cross the line, that damages the image of the army and the armed forces. And actually, because they're bringing the forces into disrepute, then they are increasing animosity and terrorism against the armed forces. So I don't think there should be prosecutions for Bloody Sunday for those reasons I mentioned. But in today's context, I don't think being stressed in the battle zone, in the war zone, is an excuse to abuse civilians. I mean, that's a bit like saying someone suffering from alcoholism and they assault someone, oh, well, alcoholism's a terrible disease. They're going through a terrible time in their life. So we're going to let them off the hook because they assaulted a stranger. So let's say, for example, a British soldier or any soldier for that matter has seen a colleague killed. That's horrible. But let's say they decide to then seek revenge on civilians. No, I don't think that can be condoned. I mean, if we took that attitude, then Sergeant Casey in the Vietnam War would have escaped punishment for his role in the My Lai massacre. And I think that wouldn't go down too well. You know, soldiers are in a position of responsibility and power. Power in the sense of they have power over civilians. So the wider premise, I don't agree with the knee-jerk reaction, and I find it very extreme, frankly, where people are sort of have this attitude: if you criticize individual soldiers, you're anti-military. That's rubbish. But in this particular case, because of the passage of time, and because IRA terrorists got early release, for that reason, I don't think they should be prosecuted. Um, Incidentally, I've seen veterans themselves say that they know of people who have crossed the line. I'm not talking about Bloody Sunday, but you know, when people wear the uniform, they're putting themselves on the front line, and they deserve utmost respect. They're literally risking their lives for their country, and that definitely commands respect. But if they do cross the line, we can't exactly lecture other countries about human rights if we turn a blind eye to ugly things done in our name. That's how I feel about it. And it shouldn't be a stigma to say that. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Let me know your thoughts.